In this week's Bizline, factors cause consumer price index increase. And navigating inflation control and price stabilization policies. Hello and welcome to the final episode of Bizline of the Year of the Dragon. The General Statistics Office of Vietnam has reported that in 2024, Vietnam average consumer price index or CPI increased by 3.63% compared to 2023. This achievement highlights Vietnam's success in keeping inflation below the National Assembly threshold. The moderate inflation rate reflects a balanced approach, supporting economic growth while maintaining macroeconomic stability. This stands out as a key accomplishment of Vietnam's economy in 2024. Looking ahead to 2025, Vietnam is forecast to face new inflationary pressures. The proximity of the 2025 calendar New Year and the Lunar New Year, the Year of the Snake, is expected to spur a dramatic surge in purchasing power in a short time. This would create challenges for price stabilization. Now, in this week, Bizline will learn more about Vietnam's successful inflation control in 2024, examine the policies designed to manage prices during the Lunar New Year, and analyze potential factors influencing CPI trends in 2025. Stay tuned as we dive into these crucial topics. But first, let's start with a detailed report.
The UK's Fibre to Fashion news agency reported data from the General Statistics Office of Vietnam indicating that the country's consumer price index CPI increased by 3.63% in 2024 compared to the previous year, meeting the target set by the National Assembly. Meanwhile, the Pinnacle Gazette noted that this inflation rate was lower than the government's initial projection for the year. This outcome was attributed to effective monitoring and timely policy adjustments by authorities, which helped stabilize both inflation and exchange rates.
The reason for the success is largely due to the State Bank of Vietnam, the central bank, which has kept monetary growth and credit growth reasonable for the most part. And there are, various pressures to keep the exchange rate, not depreciating too much. And that actually has probably helped control inflation.
International media have praised the Vietnamese government's proactive efforts to monitor inflation's impact on consumer spending and overall confidence in the economy, ensuring sound economic management policies.
Staple goods prices have stable and actually fallen until its year end, and that really, gave a big anchor to Vietnam's inflation. And the other thing I saw is also because Vietnam's benign inflation was really thanks to the subdued or weaker oil prices. I think Vietnam is very much sensitive to the international oil prices, to any volatility. But in 2024,
maintaining a stable inflation rate has helped people plan, has helped people to take advantage of the global environment. When you consider inflation across the world and how it's fluctuated, having that stability, and that, I think, is proof of how well it's working.
In the studio today, we welcome economist Dr. Lê Duy Bình, Managing Director of Economica Vietnam. And joining us from Germany is Professor Andreas Stoffers, an expert in Southeast Asian economic relations from FOM University of Applied Sciences. Well, thank you to both of our guests for being here with us.
Thank you for having me.
Now, Vietnam's CPI rose by 3.63%, marking a decade of keeping inflation below 4%. So how do you evaluate this achievement of inflation stabilization in the context of Vietnam's overall economic performance?
We see that the high inflationary pressure in many other countries that we have a strong trade and investment relation with. So this high inflation rate has a strong impact on the economy of these countries. And it has impact on the materials, the price of the material that we have to import for the production in Vietnam. So again, it has a pressure on inflation on the consumer price index in Vietnam. However, in that context, we still achieve a moderate inflation rate that is really an achievement for us. So this moderate inflation has contributed significantly to economic growth in 2024. For many sense, the low inflation rate is really an important factor to ensure that the macroeconomic stability is stable last year. And it has been very helpful in shoring up the confidence of the investor. And it helped many investors and business community to be more confident in their business decision, in the investment decision. And it also helped to strengthen the confidence of the consumers.
Now, in your opinion, how have the government supporting policy contributed to fostering business confidence in Vietnam, in turn maintaining its low inflation?
Businesses would like to have a stable environment and they would like to make as much profit as possible. And the most important thing for Vietnam is that the stable environment is there. There have been a very flexible monetary policy of the State Bank of Vietnam, maintaining low lending rates, stabilizing the exchange rates, and controlling the inflation under 4%. These measures also aimed to give access for businesses to loans. And if you have in mind, for example, the restructuring deadlines and debt classification, the Vietnamese government and especially the State Bank of Vietnam has maintained until December 2024, and also the restructuring and the reduction of rates and fees and repayment terms, which is valid until the end of this year, until the end of 2025, has supported the business community a lot, and especially from the psychological effects have improved the confidence of the business to do business in Vietnam.
And the low interest rate also been very helpful in giving room for the government to maintain an expansionary fiscal policy. And all this has been very helpful for the business community. So from the inflation perspective, low inflation has been very helpful as a support by the government in maintaining low inflation and stable macroeconomic stability.
As the Lunar New Year approaches, demand for goods is on the rise. To ensure sufficient supply and stabilize prices, businesses, supermarket chains and distributors have proactively increased their stock reserves by an average of 5 to 20% compared to last year's state plans. Additionally, they are rolling out various incentive programs.
According to the Ministry of Industry and Trade, consumer purchasing power during Lunar New Year 2025 rose by over 10% compared to last year. To prevent price spikes, businesses and distributors were asked to coordinate their inventory and avoid hoarding or inflating prices before, during and after the holiday.
Điểm bán bình ổn thị trường của công ty chúng tôi tăng trưởng so với năm rồi cũng khoảng 20%. Chúng tôi đã mở rộng sang các cái kênh chợ truyền thống, thậm chí có những điểm bán tạp hóa người tiêu dùng rất là dễ tiếp cận, ở đâu cũng có. Do đó thì chúng ta không có lo tình trạng là khan hiếm cục bộ rồi bị đẩy giá thị trường lên.
In supermarkets, fresh produce and green vegetable counters saw the highest customer traffic, while abundant inventory and major promotions helped maintain stable prices.
Mỗi một ngày chúng tôi tung ra những hai mã giảm đến 50%, ngoài ra là mua một tặng một, hoặc là những cái khuyến mãi thêm cho cá nguyên con, gà nguyên con, bánh kẹo và giò chả thịt heo. Với cái chương trình khuyến mãi này thì chúng tôi đang ghi nhận là mức tăng trưởng 15% so với cùng kỳ năm ngoái.
To boost consumer confidence, the industry and trade sector stepped up market monitoring to prevent poor quality goods and sudden price increases during the holiday season.
Các mặt hàng thì cơ bản là hàng Việt và chúng tôi cũng hướng đến cái việc tiêu dùng xanh, tiêu dùng bền vững.
Additionally, market management forces across the country were tasked with intensifying inspections, enforcing regulations, and addressing issues with high-demand products such as confectionery, alcohol, tobacco, gasoline, and fresh foods. These efforts aim to prevent sharp price increases during and after Tet.
Now, this year, the Lunar New Year holiday falls shortly after the 2025 New Year, so consumer spending is expected to surge in this short period of time. The Ministry of Industry and Trade predicts that purchasing power may rise by more than 10% compared to the same period last year. So, will this increase in demand affect the CPI index in the first quarter of 2025?
I think every Vietnamese has experienced it by himself, by herself in the last years, that whenever Tet is coming, the prices are going up. We have a small kind of inflation which can be felt by everyone in Vietnam. I consider this as a very seasonal effect, and it will not have a big impact on the overall inflation rate and the control of inflation in Vietnam. Definitely in the first quarter, I think we will observe an increase of the inflation, but in the next quarters to come, it will calm down to the normal level again, and I consider it as definitely below the 4%.
Consumer behavior have changed. They don't stockpile anymore, so they just purchase just enough for a few days during Tet. So the consumption could be high, but it is not as high as it used to be. Secondly, we can see that the distribution network has been very efficient. So many of the shops, many of the convenience stores, supermarket are open throughout the Tet or just only 1 or 2 days after Tet. So it also helps to release the psychology of the people of stockpiling goods and commodity. So for these reasons, I think that there are pressure, but this pressure is lighter as it used to be.
Now, what solutions should be implemented to keep the pressure on the CPI under control during this peak period?
It is very important to address the effect of imported inflation and the danger of imported inflation to Vietnam. So for Vietnam, that means it is very important to diversify the trade and investment partners. And this goes hand in hand with Vietnamese bamboo policy, which plays a key role to balance between the various super and middle and small powers in the world to reduce the dependence of Vietnam on a single or a limited number of trading partners, which could result, if you have only 1 or 2 main trading partners, that could result in a bigger inflation. At the same time, it is also very important for Vietnam to avoid pursuing an overly expansionary monetary policy. I think maintaining the solidity of the public finances is equally important, which means exercising very cautious policies to prevent excessive spending that could undermine the economic stability.
Global economies are closely monitoring the potential impact of U.S. President Donald Trump's proposed tariff policies. He has announced plans to impose tariffs of up to 10% on global imports, 60% on Chinese goods, and 25% on products from Canada and Mexico. These proposed rates would significantly exceed the 7.5% to 25% tariffs applied to Chinese imports during his first presidential term.
I think the market, the whole world is waiting for more clarity on his policies. What I call uncertainty is the new certainty. We don't know exactly what kind of tariff policies will pan out, especially in the form of it. During his campaign, he pledged 60% of tariffs on China, universal 10 to 20% tariffs on everyone else. But we're still waiting for the details to come out. Especially say. In what form is it? The magnitude of the tariff policies. Is it going to be applied to certain sectors, or is it universal? We're still waiting for that.
A general tariff on all imports from anywhere. And that would gum up things a little because, you wouldn't grow your exports as quickly to the U.S.
Vietnam plays a critical role in the global supply chain, serving as a key manufacturing hub for major U.S. companies like Apple, Google, Nike, and Intel. However, the The second Trump administration's trade policies prioritize tariffs as a tool to reduce the U.S. trade deficit and boost domestic manufacturing.
We also have heard that there could be a scenario where there will be a universal tariff to be imposed in all trading partners of the US. And in such scenario, that could bring down the global trade. Global trade could be softening. Global economy or global growth could be impacted as well. And that could have also adverse impact on Vietnam's economy, which depends heavily on trade, on global trade. And at the same time, we are having a scenario this morning that some countries are to be taxed or to be imposed, for example, Canada and Mexico. So I think in this scenario or in this example, we are also waiting to see if such scenario could be also seen in other countries as well or not. I think there are still uncertainties regarding US trade policy at this juncture, and we may need to wait maybe a bit more, or maybe in Q2, second quarter, that we have clarity. And in these three scenarios, I think we should remain cautious on the external front for Vietnam, at least in 2025.
The U.S. president has also threatened to impose tariffs of up to 20% on all imported goods. Such high tariffs would raise the price of Vietnamese exports, diminishing their competitiveness in the U.S. market and potentially eroding Vietnam's market share. This could lead to a decrease in export turnover, negatively affecting Vietnam's trade balance and surplus.
Looking ahead in 2025, what challenges will Vietnam face in controlling its inflation?
We would face quite a number of external difficulty, and we see that the new U.S. government with President Trump, who just assumed office, that there would be likely that there would be the risk that the trade tension would be higher, and this trade tension would result in probably in the disruption of trade in some of the area. So the disruption of trade might result in higher price of many commodities, of many goods, of many services, and especially the goods and services and the material that we need to import into Vietnam in order to consume, in order to produce, to export.
What will happen? I think the United States will have a more protectionistic policy, so that Vietnamese goods exported from Vietnam to the United States will be not so easy as in the past. That could result in higher prices domestically, and also the kind of inflation which can come from the United States in the years to come. Imported inflation could be a problem also coming from the United States.
We are aiming at a very high growth for this year. And often that we see in some other countries, there is a risk that high growth is associated with high inflation. So we need to watch this very carefully. We need to keep an eye on this. So in order to that, we have to maintain high growth, but at the same time, we need to have the measure to control inflation under the target.
The Vietnamese government has set a target CPI of around 4.5% for 2025. So what are your thoughts on this goal, considering the country's economic outlook this year?
Of course, I think this inflation target aligns well with the economic expectations for Vietnam, which are between 8 to 8.5%, not only in 2025, but also in the years to come. And I think this strong growth reflects Vietnam's progress towards the long-term goal of becoming an industrialized nation by 2045.
So in addition to that, we can see that there's some external factor that can be favorable for us, like the economy in other countries has been growing up, but the inflation pressure has been cooling down in many economies. So we see that in Europe, in the EU, in the US, or in other economy, inflation pressure has been cooling down. So it is another external factor that can be helpful for us to control inflation this year.
In 2025, global fluctuations are expected to drive up prices of certain goods, particularly food, fuel, and imported materials. Exchange rate changes could further increase production costs. The government is also implementing a roadmap to adjust prices for electricity, medical services, and education as part of a move toward a full cost recovery model. These factors will likely contribute to a rise in the Consumer Price Index (CPI). The Ministry of Finance plans to address these challenges through focused forecasting and targeted solutions.
Bộ Tài chính thì cũng giao cho Cục Về giá tổ chức 3 cái đoàn đi nắm bắt giá cả thị trường, nắm bắt thị trường ở 3 miền, ở những cái vùng từ đồng bằng cho tới thành phố cho tới miền núi, để từ đó mà có những cái báo cáo với Ban chỉ đạo điều hành giá, để từ đó có những cái giải pháp cụ thể.
Experts predict that Vietnam's inflation in 2025 will be shaped by global commodity prices, geopolitical tensions, exchange rate volatility, and economic instability. The country's inflation outlook will also depend heavily on oil and raw material prices, as well as overall global economic growth.
The protectionist policies of the US are likely to dampen global demand, and so that will partly negate any inflationary impacts can impact on supply chains, and any disruption or instability in global supply chains can also lead to inflationary pressures. So that's a big uncertainty that we don't know what's going to happen in the next year. That'll have to be watched.
International organizations project steady global economic growth of 3.2% in 2025. While crude oil and basic input material prices may slightly decline, exchange rates and interest rates remain uncertain factors influencing Vietnam's prices.
The effect on food production is hard to predict, but it's getting hotter and hotter each year. Many crops don't do well when it gets very hot. You dry out the soil, these old tankers that turn off their transponders and try, to get Russian oil into various places. If Russian oil exports are cut badly, that would probably drive up the price of oil, and that would be another risk.
EU thì họ có yêu cầu nhiều hơn, kiểm soát nhiều hơn về cái carbon footprint từ các sản phẩm nhập khẩu vào châu Âu, thì nó cũng sẽ ảnh hưởng các chi phí đối với doanh nghiệp Việt Nam trong việc xuất khẩu hàng hóa vào đó. Thì đó là cái yếu tố mà nó có thể ảnh hưởng đến lạm phát của Việt Nam trong 2025.
So what recommendation would you make for Vietnam to control its CPI in 2025?
So if we can do well on other indicators, especially budgetary deficit, and I think that it has a very strong impact, a very good impact on improving on controlling inflation. So I think that is the first important factor that we need to do. And the second one is that we need to maintain production. We need to maintain the seamless delivery of services. There's no disruption in trade. There's no disruption in production. That's very important to ensure that the supply of goods and services are stable on the market.
And if you compare it with the excessive debt in some Eurozone countries or in the United States, Vietnam still has a very solid basis to develop further in the future. In this context, I consider the inflation target of 4% seems very reasonable and achievable. Be careful not to increase the inflation and the interest rate too much, and also at the same time don't come back to a zero interest rate policy just in order to fuel the economy, which is at the end not very sustainable.
And thirdly, we have to be very watchful of the market to make sure that the monetary policy to be responsive to the market. and we have to control the risk that is associated with the trade disruption that, or the trade tension, international trade tension that is likely being stronger for this year and the year to come. So these are the factors that we need to be very aware of, to be very watchful of.
In the final months of the Lunar New Year and during Tet holiday, prices for food, clothing and household items typically increase, driving up the CPI. The global economic situation and tariff policies create additional inflationary pressures. To maintain economic stability and growth, experts recommend implementing and regularly updating inflation forecasts from early 2025 to enable swift responses. Key measures include monitoring prices of basic goods, particularly gasoline, managing supply chains and preventing sharp prices increase. It's also vital to keep a close watch on the fiscal and monetary policies of Vietnam's key trade and investment partners to respond promptly to emerging challenges. And that has also wrapped up our last edition of Bizline for the Year of the Dragon. From our team here at VTV International, enjoy your New Year celebration and don't forget to join us next year for more economic news from Vietnam. In the meantime, you can log on to vtv4.vtv.vn or download our mobile app VTV Go from App Store or Google Play for a lot more. Thanks for tuning in and until next time.